Welcome to XYPN Radio, where your host Alan Moore brings you into a community of fee-only financial planners who want to profitably and successfully serve Gen X and Gen Y clients. If you're ready to get the knowledge you need from leaders in your field, learn from forward-thinking advisors, and take action on your own goals, XYPN Radio is the show for you. Here's your host.
Hello and welcome to this episode of XYPN Radio. I'm your host, Alan Moore, and today I'm excited to have Tony Madsen, a fee-only financial planner out of rural Minnesota, on the show today. Tony started his firm back in November of 2015 and has been building his business since. Tony was very transparent in talking about his first-year expenses and all the things he spent money on and some of the things he wished he hadn't spent money on, and revenue for even the last 12 months. He's just crossed into the black and is setting up for 2018 to be his first profitable year. Tony also shared his cash flow management process, which in theory will sound like what many advisors are currently doing with their clients, but he actually goes one step further by implementing the cash flow strategy on behalf of his clients. It's a really cool way of helping his clients actually implement his recommendations instead of leaving it up to them. At the end, he shared his greatest successes and failures while running his business, which will be helpful to both new and experienced firm owners alike. You can find any of the additional resources that we mentioned during the episode at xyplanningnetwork.com/113. Also, be sure to go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to join our private group just for XYPN Radio listeners. It's a community of advisors we've all been looking for that's there to provide support when we need it the most. Best of all, it's free. I encourage you to check it out. Again, that's xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP. Without further ado, here's my interview with Tony. Hey, Tony, welcome to the show, man. Thanks so much for being on.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So I'm excited because you and I had a conversation about a week ago, and just learning more about your firm, I was really excited to get you on the show to share some of the things that I learned that you're working on, because it sounds like you have a really unique process and unique firm. So I guess just real quick, could you give listeners sort of an overview of sort of who you are, your practice, just a quick blurb, and then we'll dig into the details here in a bit, but just sort of an overview of, what you're doing, your firm, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. So I'm a father of a wonderful 4-year-old son. He and I just actually got off the golf course here a minute ago. So it's how I spend my summers here in Minnesota. His name's Karsten. My wife is Michelle, a mathematics teacher here in the local school. I'd say about a year ago, 18 months ago, I started a fee-only financial planning firm called New Leaf Financial Guidance. We are located in rural Minnesota, but I do my business primarily between the Minneapolis area and Sioux Falls.
Oh, fantastic. So Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
Correct. Yep.
And I don't actually think there are any fee-only planners in South Dakota, or in Sioux Falls, at least not when I was in South Dakota. It's been a few years now, though.
Yeah, it really works out well for me when people search for fee-only financial planners in South Dakota. I think I'm the only one coming back. So.
That's how I used to be in Montana. It's like a big old state, not very many people, but only one of us, which was kind of cool.
Yep.
Awesome. So give me just a little bit of background on sort of how did you become a financial planner? Was this your path, I guess, to begin with? Yeah,
so straight out of college, I thought I was going to become a financial advisor. So I took the first job I could possibly get with a large broker-dealer, working in their trading and service group. And the reason I took that job is they offered to pay you to study for the Series 7 and the 63.
Nice.
And I was, 24 years old, 23 years old, and thought that I would be able to go in there, study, 2 weeks later quit, and become an advisor. But I quickly realized that I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, 23-year-old Tony is a lot different than 33-year-old Tony sitting across the desk from you. So I was in that service role for about 18 months to maybe 2 years. But while I was doing that, I actually started in on the CFP and started taking the courses and the modules in a weekend course. It was live. It wasn't online. But really started taking the first one without any knowledge of what the CFP was. And I was actually deciding between the CFP and the CFA. And in hindsight, I'm extremely glad that I didn't go the CFA route. That just doesn't fit me very well. But so started working on that, and that opened a few doors to work in a financial planning department for this big company. I spent the next 4 years of my career there working in different capacities within that financial planning section of the firm, and really was surrounded by amazing minds in financial planning, and really was able to cut my teeth in financial planning while working with advisors. So, for example, we would have advisors from all over the nation calling in and asking questions about financial planning, about theory, and about how to actually put it into place for their clients. And I was able to sit back and research it for advisors and give them a good answer. And again, where an advisor typically works with, let's say, 100, 150 clients a year, I was able to see 30 to 40 cases a day. And
wow,
that upbringing or that education for me is priceless.
So I'm just curious. You mentioned about signing up for the CFP without even really knowing a lot about it. Like,
yeah,
it just seems like a big leap. I mean, it's not like a day long. Go in for a day for a workshop. Like, that's a big commitment. Like, what was it about it that actually got you to sign up without knowing a whole lot?
I come from a family of nerds, I guess is the way I would put it. I don't necessarily look the part or act the part, but learning is very important to me. So again, back to the conversation of the Series 7 and 63 was definitely not enough for me to be able to sit across from clients. With the goal of being an advisor one day, I wanted to really make myself, or make that path possible, I guess is the way that I would put it. So honestly, I don't know why I chose it. It was between that and the CFA. I had another buddy that was doing the CFA at the same time, and you got to be into the numbers and that kind of thing for the CFA, and I knew that I was more wanting to learn how to work and interact with people directly.
So this is sort of a little bit off topic question, but I'm curious because I never, the only series exam I ever took was the 65. So for someone who is getting into financial planning, I know I have heard that brokerage firms will say, oh, the Series 7 is like the CFP. It's basically the same content.
No, not even close.
True? Okay, so can you tell me, I know what the Series 7 does, but what is the education that goes into the Series 7 versus the CFP?
So I would say the Series 7, when I took it, and I think it's changed since then, but when I took it, it was more specific to trading. I guess I don't really know how to answer your question exactly, but I mean, it was more specific to the trading and the different type of instruments that you would use with the client, whereas the CFP is more, how do you navigate a client situation and how do you deal with multiple moving parts? If that makes sense.
Gotcha.
One gets you prepared to work with clients and gets you to a place where you can comfortably sit down and have conversation. The other one really just gets you to a place where you can trade on behalf of clients, right? I mean, they're night and day, completely different in my opinion.
Okay. No, that's good to know. Like I said, I never even started to study for the Series 7, so it's a unknown to me. So you said that you're currently in rural Minnesota. Were you the larger firm that you worked for and sort of learn financial planning? Was that also in that area, or did you have to be in the big? Were you in Minneapolis or something in order to work?
Yeah, the big city of Minneapolis, right? So, okay. I was working downtown Minneapolis for the first 6 years, and then I did transition out when my son was born to a financial planning practice in Edina, Minnesota, and was in that practice for a couple of years before I decided that that model just wasn't going to fit me in the long term. It just wasn't going to be for me.
And so was that sort of your last job before launching your firm?
Yeah. I think you and I and a group of people talked to you on a Friday, and about 3 days later, I decided that it was enough and I was gonna do this on my own. I'm not suggesting that to anyone that's listening to this podcast. Maybe go a little bit more deep in thought, but it had been something on my mind. It had been something that I had thought about. I just kind of reached a breaking point where I either needed to do it now or I was going to be sitting in that same practice. Nothing against that practice, but I was going to be there for years, and it never was going to be a good fit for me. So.
Gotcha. So was that the happy hour that we did with, I'm trying to remember who all was there. There was a group of advisors there in Minnesota. Is that the happy hour you're talking about?
No, it was actually a phone call that we had.
Oh, okay. So. Awesome. No, and it's so funny, conversations that you'll have with folks and you don't really realize the impact. And that's why advisors ask me all the time, what can I do to help move the profession forward? And my thing is just talk to other planners, just ask them questions, find out what they're up to, find out what they want to be doing, especially younger, advisors that may not be in the right fit. Because sometimes all you need is just, like I said, sometimes you're at that breaking point. You just never know when you're going to talk to an advisor that needs a little bit of a nudge, one direction or the other. Sometimes the direction is going and getting a different job or talking to their boss, or maybe it is starting their own firm.
Yeah, and I grew up in that broker-dealer model where you drink the Kool-Aid long enough, you believe that's really the only way to do business.
So true.
And I worked in a capacity at one point during my career there where I worked hand in hand with compliance and attorneys and all of these higher up people that their primary function was to make sure people weren't hurting themselves and weren't hurting the brand that the company stood for. And I just felt so restricted in what we could do. And when I started researching the RIA space and doing my own firm, it opened my eyes to all the possibilities that are out there and how you can actually have fun with your clients. You can do some pretty cool things that are outside of what we were allowed to do in a strict compliance atmosphere.
So did you end up going to launch your firm sort of there in Minneapolis, or did you and your family move first? I guess talk to me about that part of the story.
Yeah, so again, learn from what Tony did and do something completely different if you want to survive or have your marriage survive. I'm happily married, will continue to be, but it's been a trying year. So I left my previous firm in November, spent the next few months getting everything set up. As you know, it takes some time. But in May, we listed our house and we moved in July. So the first half of my year was really filled up with moving and all of that stuff. But I just felt, for me, I could run my firm anywhere. I think we preach that at XYPN. All you need is your laptop or whatever you're working off and some Wi-Fi, and you really can do what we do. And I truly believe that's the case. So for me, it was a lifestyle choice, and it was getting my son closer to his grandparents and closer to the way that I grew up. And my wife and I are high school sweethearts, so we're in our hometown. And, just being able to provide the same opportunities we had growing up that we enjoyed. We understand there were trade-offs between rural Minnesota and the metro area where there are great opportunities there as well. It's just really what are you comfortable with? So my decision to move had very little to do with my practice and everything to do with my family.
So you said November. So would this have been November of 2015?
Correct. Yep.
So the process basically started about 18 months ago at this point, maybe 20 months ago. And goodness, it's hard to believe it's coming up on the end of 2017, it feels like. This year's moving fast. So we're actually approaching 2 years, but you spent the first bit moving. So now you've really been settled for the last 12 months, it sounds like.
Yeah. So I would say the first, so not only did I move, but then I thought it was a bright idea to do a home remodel and do it myself. So from July until November, I was remodeling a kitchen and everything else. So really piled it on myself. I deserve every bit of it. But the other part is I did have some existing clients, and it was just a handful, but I wanted to make sure that I had everything set up and ready to rock and roll for them before I tried to bring them over. So I spent probably October and a little bit of November of last year making sure that they were on board, I would say, up until that point. And then really started to market myself to the public, I would say, in November timeframe of last year. So we're coming up on a year. I would say that, to be fair, it's been definitely a year since I've been bringing on clients.
Okay. Yeah, that's the part that's hard to account for. And for advisors that are out there that are looking at possibly more than just launching a firm, well, maybe I should say this in two ways. One, if you're looking at doing other things at the same time, just be aware it will slow the launch process. But when you go to launch your firm, you may find sometimes when you burst your bubble, sort of your we all sit in a bubble and we all sort of know our space and we've given ourselves, I don't know the right term, but sort of this like these artificial barriers. And maybe they're not always artificial, but we have these barriers like you must live in Minnesota or in Minneapolis. And I don't know if this is how it went for you, but this is how it went for me. That one day when you go to launch your firm, you're like, I don't have to live here anymore. And it's this like freeing experience, which can be a little overwhelming because the options are endless. But we see this all the time with new firm owners. Will take the opportunity as they're launching a firm to make other changes as well that they weren't able to make in their previous job, such as moving or buying a new house or downsizing or whatever the thing is. Moving seems to be the most popular. But it is something to be aware of that, one, that situation may present itself, but two, it can certainly have an effect on, on your business. It's hard to hit the ground running and go from 0 to 60 really quickly if you're in the process of moving and remodeling and all that. Not that those are bad choices, simply to be aware that the decision that you're making, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, I think there's a financial preparedness that you have to have as well, right? So
absolutely.
And to make sure that you're making realistic goals. I mean, if your goals are to launch your firm in November, but you quit your previous job before, even starting to think of a name for your firm so that you can file appropriately, all those things really compound on themselves. And before you know it, I think February is when my official registration went through after leaving in November. So November 16th of 2015 is when I left. And I believe February is when I could finally start, holding myself out as an advisor.
Yeah, it is surprising sometimes how long it takes, especially around the holidays. And that's something we always warn firms about when they say like, oh, I want to launch December 1st or something. I'm always like, I doubt it.
Well, yeah. And again, a part of it was my fault because, again, I talked to you on a Friday and a Monday I left. And it's because you're such a great salesman, Alan. But I made that decision without, again, I didn't even have a firm name in mind. I hadn't fully worked out how I was going to charge for the services that I provided. And those are some things that you can do previous to leaving your current firm or your current job. I would have some of those things ironed out, is the way that I would put it. I don't know that it would have changed anything for me just because, again, I was ready to go and it was my time to do something different. But those are definitely good points.
That is a great point that we try to have folks join XY so they can start the compliance process like 3 to 4 months before they actually want to launch. Because we do have checklists and such to say like, these are the decisions you need to make to file your paperwork. Because like you said, you have to have a firm name. Like you need to know your website. You need to know your business address. You need to know your fee structure. Like you can't start that process without having a lot of those decisions made. And they don't just happen overnight. No. I remember toiling for weeks on a firm name and didn't even end up coming up with that good a one, but like, it's just a process because you're like, I'm going to be stuck with this firm name. It's like naming a child, it's like you will have this name for the rest of your life. It feels like a big deal.
I think that every one of my family members and friends blocked me on text messaging because I kept sending just random names to them. It literally was a 3-week process, I think, before I figured out what I was going to name it. We were working on other things at the same time, but it took a long time. I didn't want it to be Tony Madsen Financial because my goal is not to just be me. It's hopefully down the road it is a firm where there are other people working in it. So
that's a great point, and I appreciate you sharing that because there is certainly a lot of preparation you can do before you end up leaving your job and that sort of thing. I'm not, and we're going to talk about this at a later date, but I'm not the biggest fan of like trying to start your business on the side. Now, if you're a financial planner, you really can't just because, from a regulatory standpoint, but there's a lot of thinking and planning that can be done for a few months on the nights and weekends. Be fair to your boss. They're paying your salary. So keep working hard, but there's some decisions that could be made that would make the transition a little easier. But like I said, and I'm sort of the same way, once you get an idea in your head, it'd be hard to have stopped me from doing the same thing you did. So
yeah, I just felt like if I wasn't going to be all in on this, I didn't know that it ever would happen. So yeah,
it's a great point.
It's kind of like jumping in a cold swimming pool. You just got to get it over with.
Jump in the deep end and find out if you can swim. That's just hopefully there's a lifeguard.
You feel like you're at the bottom. Yeah.
Oh, it's so true. So tell me, so you sort of had we'll say sort of a slower rollout. It wasn't like this big bang that one day, you have a business and you're rocking, bringing on clients. It sounds like you sort of had a transition of like getting the firm going in let's see, February. And then you said you really didn't start bringing on your older clients or the previous clients until November. Were you bringing on other clients during that time, or you were really just building the foundation to bring those clients over?
So I would say that I was bringing clients on. I was not actively pursuing clients. So, if, for instance, a family member referred someone to me and they were a good fit for what I was planning to do, I was very upfront with them on where I was in the stage of creating the firm and how I thought that it would run once we got up and running. And I would give them the option of, if you want to continue to work with me now, great. If you want to wait 6 months, I don't blame you. And the majority of them were good with starting, at that time and started to move forward. So yeah, I guess when I talk about starting to acquire clients, I mean actively seeking them out and actively marketing really didn't start happening until November, December of last year. So
okay, so that's when you basically became more proactive in the process and less just being reactive.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is a plug for your partners here, but when I started out, I didn't have the ability to do what I wanted to do with my clients because I wasn't going to make a promise to a TD Ameritrade or a Scottrade to bring on a minimum of assets, right? And so I was having a hard time finding a custodian that was going to work with me. And I would have met their minimums, but really until XY Planning Network formed their partnership with TD Ameritrade, I wasn't fully able to do what I needed to do for my clients. And that was a big turning point for me to start really hitting putting my foot on the gas. So
yeah, it's a great point. So for listeners that are unaware, XY Planning Network and TD Ameritrade do have a partnership that any asset minimums or more expectations, TD Ameritrade does not have you must have 10 million to join. But they do sort of have this line of at some point in the near future, you need to be at 7 to 10 million in AUM. And it's sort of an unwritten rule. But, if you're like me, I mean, I think after 2 years of being in business, I had like 3 million AUM. I was not their ideal advisor. So the partnership between XY Planning Network and TD Ameritrade is that any XYPN member that that gets waived and there's no asset expectations. So they're not calling our members asking, hey, why don't you have 10 million yet? Just because many of us weren't building a business that suited that, type of growth. And I am certain you will have 10 million AUM. You're going to grow a lot of clients into grow the assets into that point. You're working with accumulators, I suspect. But it's going to take a little while because you're not starting out working with $1 million clients, is my presumption. So tell me a little bit about sort of your firm when you first launched, just sort of the fee structure and service model that you initially launched with, and maybe a little bit on how that has evolved over time for you.
Really, the fee structure that I started out with is pretty much where I still am today, and that is I have a few different tiers of relationship styles, so standard, choice, and elite, and I really try to pick what fits the client the most, and each of the tiers differ a little bit on how many times a year we're going to meet, the type of information you're going to receive, the type of communications you're going to receive, etc. So within those tiers, I've set a standard pricing, and it's an annual fee that the majority of my clients choose to pay on a monthly basis. So the standard tier is somewhere from the range of $1,000 to $3,500. The choice tier starts at $3,000 and goes to $6,000, and elite is $6,000 and above. And I started out, I mean, a lot of planners probably going to listen to this and think that $1,000 for a planning fee is low. But part of my mission here is that I don't want a fee to come in between me and working with the right type of client. I don't want anyone to ever feel like they can't work with me because they don't meet my minimums. And that's just something very important to me. If you're a good fit and fun to work with, I want to work with you, and I don't want to, be hamstrung by any of that, if that makes sense.
It does.
Within each of those tiers, though, is you talked about a client service model, and actually in my previous firm, one of the things that I was charged with is to revamp their client service model. So I had a ton of expertise, I guess you could call it, in creating client service models and creating workflows behind the scenes. And I just essentially replicated a lot of that work for these different tiers. So a standard client, we may meet twice a year, and in the first half of the year, we're going to cover these 5 things. In the second half, we're going to cover the next 5. And throughout the year, we're going to cover everything there is possible to cover in your finances. But we're going to cover it in a way that hopefully you don't feel like you're drinking from a fire hose, right?
Yep.
And in a choice and elite, we just break it up a little bit more where, maybe we have someone that needs to meet 3 or 4 times a year. That would be a primary difference between those.
Okay. So the different tiers it's sort of we'll call it complexity based in a way where you're just looking at, how much time and energy it's going to take.
Yep. Absolutely.
So I know every state regulator is different. So some states prefer more tangible rationales around pricing that they want to know that it's very, very consistent. Does your state regulator require you to sort of like document why you are at tier 2 versus tier 1 or tier 3, or have you had any issues with sort of, running, we'll say, more with your gut than, a super formal process for determining that?
So the way that I've stated it, I mean, if we're going to talk about the compliance side of it behind the scenes, is, each client I determine about how many hours a year I think I'm going to spend with them. And I have an hourly rate behind the scenes that then translates into their annual fee. Does that make sense? So
it does.
For a standard client, I expect to work with them, X hours a year to Y hours a year, somewhere in that range. And, up to this point, I haven't had any issues where it just talks about the types of things that we'll cover inside of each tier. But the complexities that we have are, they're not necessarily driven by income or AUM, which are, I think, kind of hot buttons for regulators right now, where they're more around, how much stuff do we actually need to do for you behind the scenes? Do you have high income that is going to make me have to do things on the tax side that are going to take some time? It's that type of thing that really drives the fee, not necessarily assets under management or income, which I think are two of the more scrutinized requirements or categories, I guess.
So are you changing the tier on an annual basis? I guess how often are you determining, or making any changes to the fees?
No, the agreement with the clients, and it's written, but it's also verbal, is we'll review every year. I think most clients will start to self-select where they need to be. And so it may be year one we're in a choice relationship where we need to spend quite a bit of time, where we might move to a standard in year two. I'm not shy about fees. I've actually never had to bring them up to my clients. Most of the time they bring them up to me, and that's how we end up, starting the billing for it. But, it's something that we're very open and honest about, and I think it's something that they understand, that it takes time for me to give them the advice that they get. So I'm not really answering your question, but it is something we look at all of the time, but annually at least we'll sit down and have a discussion about it.
Okay, that makes sense. And then are you doing asset management as part of your service, or are you charging separately for the asset management part in addition to sort of this, sort of time-based, monthly billing?
Yeah, so I would say it's something that's built in when we talk about complexity, right? We know that if you have, a complex asset allocation, or not even asset allocation, but a complex set of accounts, and we need to spend some time on it, it's definitely going to go into the back end, calculation of what the fee is. I do not charge an AUM percentage at this point for clients who are financial planning clients.
Okay.
If you want to be an investment management only client, and that's the choice that you've made, absolutely will allow you to pay a fee on your assets if you'd like to. But for accumulators or young people, I'd rather let them, leave their IRAs alone and not bill from there and have them pay a fee. So it really just depends on the conversation.
Okay, so for a client that comes in that maybe they are a good fit, so it wouldn't be it wouldn't be a percentage fee, but you would just let them charge their sort of flat fee against their investment accounts. Is that what I'm understanding?
So if you're a financial planning client and that's how you want to move forward and have me look at everything, those clients, 100% of my clients that are in that relationship right now are paying a fee outside of their assets. So
okay.
from a checking account or whatnot.
Okay.
But if they want only asset management, where they're saying, I have X dollars in an IRA, give me some advice, I'll let them pay. If they want to pay an asset management fee from their account, they can.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So tell me just a little bit about, I guess, your first year. And when I say a little bit, actually, we can dig in, because you seem to be someone who is very good at tracking data, which is awesome. So tell me a little bit about just sort of the first year, what did it look like from a cost and revenue perspective, and how did that compare with, I guess, your initial expectations for where you would be at the end of your first year?
I thought at the end of my first year, I'd be making at least $250,000.
At least.
At least. No, I'm not dumb in this process, and I don't mean to squash other people's hopes if they're feeling they're going to be immediately successful and bring in a ton of cash. To become a financial planner, to open your own business, it's probably going to take 2 years, maybe even 3 years to become profitable or even back to where you thought you were. So I fully expected to lose money in the first year, and I was successful in doing so. The goal was really to, by the end of year 2, to have a profitable model in place, and I think I'll be there as well. So to give you an idea, in the first year here, and we'll just take August of last year to August of this year, my revenue was about $18,000. And so that seems small. The thing of it is, if you bring on a client in November and they start paying you in December or January, because that's where you are in the relationship, some of these have a pretty slow rollout period in the way that I charge fees. So the revenue over the year was $18,000. I spent a little over $33,000 last year in expenses, and so that leaves you with a $15,000 loss. I know that when I first made the jump, there's a spreadsheet that XYPN gave me, and they said for $10,000 I could start my own firm. It probably could have been pretty close, but I wanted to spend a little bit extra money here in marketing, which I've done. I rent a space, so that's added to my expenses. But in the first year, I successfully lost about $15,000. This year, I'll probably, if you're looking at a calendar year, I'll probably be in the red by about $12,000 in total. But January 1 of 2018, my projected revenue is about $51,000-ish, $52,000. So I'll be in the black for next year without even bringing on another client for the rest of this year or next year.
So that's run rate is typically what we call that. So that is, just projecting forward your current monthly revenue that's just coming in every month, projected for the next 12 months will be around $51,000.
Yep.
That's awesome. So do you expect that $33,000 in expenses that you spent during your first 12 months, is that going to be your annual spend, or was there a lot of startup cost in that will sort of go away and your annual expenses will go down a little bit?
Well, and this is where you might want to have your guys edit out some of this, but it's a lot of dumbassery in there, right? So in marketing, I've always been someone that I have a philosophy of build it, test it, and if you think it's going to work, go and do it. And I've taken that to the marketing side, and I've definitely seen some failure there. And I've spent some money where I probably shouldn't have. And that marketing budget, I would say, is going to come down quite a bit. But I would say I'm doing a better job of it. So I'm spending money more wisely there. The other things here, so if we just take a breakdown of my expenses, because I do track these things, 40% of my budget was marketing. 24% of my budget has been tools and technology. 20% of it is association dues and membership and insurance and all that stuff. And I lump those together because some of that is billed through XYPN at this point.
Right.
And then 16% of my budget is rent. And I rent an office here that is perfect for my needs, but I don't see rent going away. I assume that association membership will probably become a larger portion of my budget as we move forward. And I think my tools and technology are pretty well dialed in, but I expect them to creep up in percentage just because my marketing will go down and some of those tools will just have inflationary cost adjustments. So I think I'm pretty close.
Yeah,
but
no, that makes sense.
My sister's an accountant, and when I started this venture, I asked her how much should I be spending in marketing, and she told me 7% is the industry, or not the industry, but is kind of an average for her industry. And I was thinking to myself, I'm going to blow that out of the water in about 2 weeks here. So, but that's where I sit.
Yeah, that's a tough, as you know, as you can imagine, that's a tough benchmark just because I think on average, RIAs spend less than 2%, according to benchmarking surveys. Less than 2% of money is spent on marketing. But as a startup, probably half of your money is going to be spent on marketing. And then, of course, it's a time-consuming process. So, because, basically, it's just you're not actually spending a whole lot of money on other stuff. And there are things you can live without, right? You can live without the fancy client portal or the fancy tool or the fancy office, but you got to grow. So,
well, and the 2% marketing, I think, is important to take into consideration. For the longest time, mutual fund companies, insurance companies, whoever else these RAs are using have been able to provide marketing support. So if we're asking advisors, and I could say for my previous firm, if you ask them how much they spent on marketing, it's pretty close to zero. and they were doing all their marketing through, mutual fund X, Y, or Z really likes me and is willing to give me some cash for marketing, and that's how they've done it. So those numbers are skewed if you're gonna go that route, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I mean, we have historically grown through referrals, which we're now, client referrals, which we're actually starting to see a major slowdown of organic growth through client referrals, just sort of industry wide. But we've been able to grow without spending a bunch of money on marketing, which is really, I think there are a lot of factors there. But digging in just a little bit sort of on two areas of your budget. So one being tools and technology. So you said about a quarter of the money, so that let's call it $7,000 to $8,000 a year is being spent on tech. So what can you give me just sort of an overview of your tech stack and what you're using and where you've decided to spend the money?
Pretty good mental math there. So $8,094.15 was last year. So for me, there's a few pieces here that are quite larger than the rest. I would say the first one being one of the larger ones for me in total cost is a piece called Infusionsoft, which I use for my email marketing and that type of thing. So that is a tool that I use that could maybe be lumped into marketing a little bit further. Some of the other things here that I have as a tech bundle is I use Blueleaf for my data aggregation and for my client portal. I am using MoneyGuide Pro, but I recently switched over to Right Capital, but that's another expense. Riskalyze is another tool I use. I think of it more as a marketing piece than anything else, but I do use the system as of now. Maybe reassessing that here as we move forward. Those are the three that are the largest, I would say, out of the entire tech bundle. A couple of those have upfront fees that were realized last year, so we may be able to get rid of those as well.
Or turn them monthly or be able to eliminate a few of those. Okay, very cool.
There's quite a few free tools that I use. They're not free, but part of the XY planning bundle. So WealthBox is my CRM. Again, I mentioned Right Capital that I'll continue to use. Some other free things or included things through TD Ameritrade. I use their rebalancing, that type of thing, on their platform. So
okay, yeah, their iRebal. It's amazing that they've made that free for all of their advisors. It only handles TD Ameritrade assets, of course, but a huge bonus to be available through there. So
absolutely.
And then just a quick breakdown on sort of where your dollars got spent from a marketing standpoint, because Infusionsoft, I can see why you're saying like it's tech, but it's also marketing. So, but that was under sort of your tech budget. So, how have you spent money on marketing? And I guess what of the money that you have spent will you continue to spend, and what have you tested that just hasn't been effective for you?
So, there's a couple things here that I would say for me haven't been effective, but for others they may have. And one of them I'm just going to leave the name out because it's neither here nor there, but it's a aggregation or a content curation system that I never really saw eye to eye with. I actually requested to leave their platform immediately, and they wouldn't allow me to, and it's just been kind of a cluster. But in that regard, I would just make sure you trust the people you list or that you ask. There were a couple of people that told me to stay away, and I thought it was a cool enough system that I just dove into it. Second one here is I tried to do some radio marketing, and I know that there are some people that have had success doing that. But for my niche market and where I currently am, in rural Minnesota, it was essentially a waste of dollars, in my opinion. The third one here is I've done some print marketing in local paper, and I will continue to do that. But I think of it more as, I love this community. I want to be a part of it. If I can provide some education to people in the community through writing for the paper and actually paying for that advertising, I'm going to continue to do that. So those are the three that really haven't worked out for me as far as ROI is concerned. Two of them we'll get rid of. The third one I'm going to keep doing just because I want to more than anything. The other places I spend money are on my website. I spend about $150 a month for content through that website and just to have my website up and running. That's where I do all my blog posts. It's where the majority of my content comes from, is this group. And it's just a all-in-one package for both content, the website, and my blog. And then finally, I just recently, as of April, hired a blogger, and she's awesome. She does all of my blogging. She does all the writing for it. I obviously, provide the guidance on what direction we want to go and what the content should look like. But she's able to do rough drafts and second drafts, that type of thing for me, which has saved a ton of time on my end. So, it's one of those things that I wish I would have done sooner, because I spent a ton of time in November, December of last year trying to come up with content for my blog and trying to write. And you just spend too much of your time doing that and not enough time, in your practice doing the things that actually are going to make you money down the road. So I think having content and having a blog and having those presence, that's important. But I think you can offload it and still be successful in doing it.
Yeah, I know there's this belief, I guess, that you have to do all your own writing, but, I'm not a good writer. I've got a lot of content in my head, but I'm really not a good writer.
Yep.
I'd rather hire someone who's really gifted at that, and they're much faster. They're better at it. I mean, they're just better at communicating. And I don't know, I definitely see that, for some of our folks, they're phenomenal writers. Great. That can be a good use of time. Kitsis is never going to outsource his writing, right? Like, he's a great writer. So yep. No one writes like Kitsis. But for the rest of us mere mortals, when it comes to writing, I just don't. I totally agree with you. I don't think it's a good use of time.
And I feel like I'm a good writer. It just is far too time consuming for me to do it. I mean, should I be spending 4 hours on an article that, 10 people may read?
Sure.
To me, that just isn't enough. Again, back to return on investment, it's just not good enough for me. So, this Zoe's her name. She's able to write for me. She's able to make sure that it's syndicated and sent out to all of the proper channels. She takes care of all of that for me. I don't have to worry about it. It's always done. It's done right, and it looks good.
So you mentioned that the local radio ads weren't really targeting your niche market. So I guess, first off, what is, or how do you define your niche market? And have you been focused on that niche, or is it sort of becoming a new focus? Did you start with a niche, I guess, is what I'm asking?
So I thought I did, is the way I would put it. But I think my issue is what a lot of advisors struggle with, and that is we're afraid to piss off 100 clients or prospects that are never going to become clients. We're afraid to tick those people off with being too specific in who we target, when maybe out of 100 people, there are only 10 that really, really matter. There may be only 5 that really matter out of that group that are ever going to become your clients. And so I thought I had a niche picked out, and I thought I had it, pretty well cemented in my head. But when it came to marketing and content, I was afraid to be that specific. Like, I don't know if it was in my mind that, all 1,000 people that follow me on various platforms were just going to hit unsubscribe and never listen to me again, and that was
right.
a fear that I had. So,
yeah,
my fear with my niche was, man, am I being too specific here where I'm not going to pick up some of these other people that would be fun to work with, but don't necessarily fit? And so my niche, when I talk about my niche now, is a lot stronger than it was before. And it's, for me, as medical professionals under the age of 40, I would even bring that back to 35 as far as age is concerned. But within that, I'm targeting 3 very specific people or sets of people. But medical professionals under the age of 35 to 40 is really where I'm going to spend the majority of my time moving forward. And the way that I see it is, whatever your niche is, do your market research. There's maybe 5 or 10,000 people in your area that fit in that niche. You really only need to get 100 of them to work with you, right? You maybe need to get 150 of them to work with you. I wouldn't be worried about offending other people just because they don't fit in your niche, whatever. Those same people that find you interesting are going to find the pieces of your content that you're putting out that apply to them, and they're still going to reach out to you. So I won't worry about that.
Yeah, I think I've told this story on the podcast before, but I remember meeting this young guy who was just a total rocker. I mean, I met him. He's got tattoos and piercings, and I think he had a purple mohawk. And he was talking about, graduating college, going to have to clean up. And, all I could think was like, don't do that. Like there are 100 to 150 people out there that want to work with a rocker, that's like in a band and also a financial planner, and I was like, you can truly be unique because you're not trying to build a business that needs 1 million clients. You need 100 to 150. And there are those out there that do want to work with you and for you to be your authentic self, and they're attracted to that side of you. So It's a hard thing to do because, like I said, you're going to tick off 99% of people that come your way, and they're not going to contact you, but that's okay because the 1% that needs to contact you that's a good fit will.
And the thing is, if you start to worry about the people, the 99% that don't matter in our example here, even if they become a client, I almost guarantee you they're going to be that client that you dread to talk to when they call you. And if you're telling me you don't have those, not you particularly, Alan, but other people listening, I don't have those, you're lying. Or you haven't been doing this long enough, because we all have that client that when they call or they email, you're just thinking to yourself, man, I really wish I would have said no to this client. And sooner or later, I'll be to the point where those clients, I actually don't have too many of those right now, but sooner or later, you'll get to a point where you just say no to the client up front and maybe even say no to the one that you already have on board.
Yeah, it's so true. So switching gears just a little bit, and really one of the things that sparked me wanting to have you on the show, it was you were describing to me the way that you were helping clients manage their cash flow at TD Ameritrade. So walk me through that again, just in terms of how, just sort of where this idea came from and your sort of cash flow management process that you've implemented with your clients.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I got to say that this idea has been ripped off from another advisor somewhere along the way. I'm not sure who it was. There are very few of us that have original thought inside of financial planning, right? It's something someone else or a group of people have come up with. So where it's come from for me is, there are a ton of financial planning meetings, or back to my experience as a sales consultant for the financial advice group, where you'd have advisors that would say, all right, it says here in this financial planning tool that you need to save $2,987.16 a month. And that would be the advice they'd give their clients. And all I can think to myself is, does your client have the ability to save that? Do they have, the knowledge it's going to take to budget appropriately? Do they even know how to put that into play, even if they wanted to, right? And to me, financial advice is only good if it's implemented. I mean, we can say all sorts of good stuff to people, but if they don't take action on it, it's a waste of time. So it really came down to, how can I help my clients manage their cash flow in an efficient way so that we can eventually get to that conversation of saving money. So my practice is built for the majority and vast majority of my clients, whether they're retired or not, is built on cash flow. And so we have a system in place that helps them manage their cash flow on a monthly basis. And I'm not talking about getting into their checking account and managing pennies here. We set up a very specific cash flow system for them, and we automate it. And that's the part you're talking about through TD Ameritrade. So I follow a cash flow system called the 10, 20, 30, 40. So 10%, I think you should give it away. You're very fortunate. You've been able to make money. I get that. But there's a ton of people that can benefit from your generosity. And I want my clients to be active, whether it's 10% of time or if it's 10% of money. Let's give back to our community and make them a better place. The 20%, I want my clients to save. And that's within your 401k, your 403b. It's maybe a Roth IRA and maybe other places, maybe for a new home, whatever it is. But our goal here should be to save 20% of our annual income. The 30%, I'm working with a ton of young medical professionals. Believe it or not, it's going to be eaten up a lot by debt. So we never want our debt payments to be outside of that 30%. And in fact, we want our minimums to be well within that so that we can throw 30% at it and make some pretty good headway on our debt. And the 40%, you get to do whatever the hell you please with it. That's not my place to tell you how to spend it. But if you follow this, you're going to have 40% of your income left over at the end of the month. Spend it as you wish, right? And so the way that we've been able to put that in play is I use a non-qualified account at TD Ameritrade, and I have my clients direct their paycheck into TD Ameritrade's non-qualified account. That account has checking, debit card, has a mobile app. They can transfer money online if they so choose. So they have full access to this account, but I try to get them to a place where they're not focusing on that account at all. And so their paycheck comes in there. On the 1st and 15th of every month, we turn around, and we talked about 40% spending, but whatever they decide they need on a monthly basis to spend, we try to split it in half, send out half of it on the 1st, half of it on the 15th, and that goes to their checking account. And that's where they're to do their, I guess you could call it discretionary spending. Some of their fixed spending will come out of there as well. But that happens automatically. And so the first step is to get that up and running, where we have a pretty good handle on what do we need to spend on a monthly basis on the 1st and 15th. Is that working? If the answer is yes, we then move on to, all right, let's attack debt. We talked about putting 30% towards debt. Can we automate an additional payment out of your TD Ameritrade account to your debt that fits within your budget? And so we start on that, and we give that a few months and see how that feels, and then we move on to saving. But the big deal here is in all of this, whether it's saving, paying additional to debt, etc., the client only really has to worry about their checking account still at the end of the month. And I try to get them to a point where that's where they're focusing, and the rest of it we can take care of on our end. And really, I always liken it to a watch. Once you have the watch set up, it's going to continue to tick every month, and money is going to be dispersed as it needs to be. And a lot of it's taken care of by the client in the initial setup, but it works out pretty well.
Yeah. So I've never heard of an advisor that I can remember using a custodial account in this way. So usually, the cash flow process makes sense and automating it makes sense, but usually we're asking our clients to do that at their bank. So, and so they have to go do everything themselves. So this is an actual brokerage taxable account at TD. You're not doing anything through TD Bank or anything like that, right? This is just an institutional investment account like any other investment account.
Correct. Yep. And so my point is this idea of out of sight, out of mind, right? So how do we get clients to really only have to think about what they have to think about? And that is, once we have all the rest of this set up, stay within your means and spending, and the rest of this is going to be taken care of for you.
And you can really control a lot, not control, but help set up a lot of this. I guess that's the more interesting piece to me, is that, you can do it because it's at TD Institutional. You can go in and set all this up on behalf of the client.
Yeah.
I mean, they have to sign the forms and such, but I mean, it allows you to be much more proactive and basically have them opt out instead of opting in a way.
Yeah.
Because it's like, just sign here and it'll be done, as opposed to, all right, I need you to go to your bank and open up this type of account. You probably need 4 accounts or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think that's awesome. And how has that been received by your clients? Do they seem to enjoy the sort of the flow and the way you've got all this set up?
So I would say there's 2 different types of clients. The first one is, hell yeah, let's get this started. It sounds awesome. And then it takes a while for them to be able to see how it's going to work, and it just takes some getting used to, right? The second group is the hell knows, and they sooner or later they get to where they need to. I mean, there's only, I'd say, one client right now that we're not doing this for, and it's just because they would rather have us pull what they're saving on a monthly basis from their checking account. But the majority of people get there. They see the value when you really lay it out for them in front of them. And a lot of people, they may act like they want the control over, when they save or how they pay down debt. But through conversation, you can really get them to see the value of doing these things systematically and not really having to think about it. So I wouldn't say, if there's anyone that's really against it, I won't make them do it. But the majority of my clients are, by the time we get to this piece, are ready to move forward with it.
That's awesome. I think it's a great idea. Like I said, anything that allows the advisor to be more proactive and increase implementation. Because like you said, a financial plan without implementation is useless. We shouldn't have written it in the first place.
Yeah.
You have to implement the recommendations.
I should give you your money back and you should go do something else with it, right? That's how I feel about it when they're not implemented. And we've all sat through this where it's, you have this rock star plan where you think someone can save money, and the first thing they say is, I don't know that I can make this happen. So this is more of, let me show you how we can get there, right? And it's baby steps. It's not, hitting them in the face with save this much or you're not going to retire. It's, hey, let's figure out cash flow a little bit here. See if we can really live on X dollars a month. And when they realize that that's sufficient, or maybe they need a little bit more, then it gets on to, all right, so we have this pot of money left over. How do we efficiently spend it? Do we need to be paying down debt like we talked about? Do we need to be saving? What are the things we need to do?
So sort of flipping back to your firm, I guess, what is your goal with the firm? I mean, do you want this? You mentioned earlier maybe that you didn't name it after yourself. So the plan is to bring on additional advisors. Do you see this growing into sort of like a virtual practice, or do you think there's enough client base that you want to grow an advisory firm there in your hometown and build the business there? I guess what do you see as the future of your firm? What are you gunning for?
So for me, if we're just talking about me personally, let's just say I decide to stay alone and maybe hire one staff member. My 2018 goal here would be to have about 40 clients on January 1. So not too far off from where I am now, and add about 20 to 30 clients a year until I hit 100. And I would probably shut down at 100 clients. Not that I don't think I could take on more. I just think I could live the type of lifestyle I want to, and still be able to go play golf with my son and see my wife and do those things, right? So if it were just me, that's the way I would go moving forward. I would love to have a team. I think there is definitely added benefit to having like-minded individuals in a group that maybe don't think about things exactly the same, but that you can trust and that you can bounce ideas off of and that type of thing. And that's, kind of what you have going on with the forums at XYPN. I actually have a few buddies from my sales consulting days that I'll text if I have a question that I need to have answers to. But I think there's definitely some value to that. So I would like to have a couple more advisors, maybe 2-3 more advisors and it would just have to be, or it's yet to be seen, but where maybe you each have your specialty and are each able to run one type of client meeting and you just rotate between the clients is really appealing to me. But that gets more into the family office style practice, which, I would love to have. It's hard to find a CPA that sees eye to eye with you and all those things. It's really just hard to manage all of those different styles of planning. So.
No, that makes perfect sense. So the 100 clients, I am curious if this connects back to a revenue number that you have in your head. Like, are you sort of looking at, I want to make X number of dollars and then sort of backing into it? Or are you more focused on, my current revenue per client works, so I just need 100 of them?
Yeah, if I had 100 clients, I'd probably have to hire someone. So this revenue number is not, straight to my pocket, take it home. But I've always had a goal to get to the 250 in revenue mark. So it'd be 100 clients at $2,500 a year is really the goal. But keeping in mind that my client base is young, will continue to grow. As they grow, they'll have more assets and more complexity in their lifestyle and in their money situations. And as that grows, so will the revenue to the firm. And there will be clients that self-select out and leave, or if you want to put it a different way, that fire me. And there will be new clients into the mix. But I'd like to, that 100 number is really driven off of somewhere in that 200,000 or 250 in revenue. And that goal is really, for me, is probably 2020. I'd like to have that. So 3 years out.
Okay. That's awesome. So if you, I guess sort of as we're sort of wrapping up, I want to ask a little bit about sort of you're a year and a half, almost 2 years into your business. What would you say have been, or I guess what would you say has been sort of your greatest success, the thing that you did right that if you could go back and do it all over, you would do it the exact same way?
No, I think for me, the greatest success has been just the courage to move away from a broker-dealer model where I could have easily been a successor to a practice. And, every advisor says they're retiring, so I could have been a successor to a practice when I was 50, I guess, is probably most likely. But it would have been easy for me to sit there and just call it a day and collect a paycheck and work with just fine clients that I really loved and enjoyed working with. But just having the guts to have an opinion on how clients should be treated and how compensation should work and how the client service model should work for my clients is what I would say is my greatest success. It's been a rocky road. It's been an up and down journey, but it's been my journey and I've loved it. So
absolutely. So what would you say have been some of your greatest, or I shouldn't say greatest, that's a strong way of putting it, but just some of your failures, some of the things that other advisors that are thinking about starting a firm could learn from your mistakes?
Yeah, I think the number one mistake I made is thinking that I could do it all by myself, right? So when we talk about having staff on the team, they can take different roles. So when I talk about having a copywriter, a blogger, a content marketer for myself, I should have hired her earlier. I mean, that I should have done that day one, because having good content and not having to do it yourself is a time saver, and it'll pay itself back in as time goes on. The second part of that is I think a lot of young planners and a lot of planners in general spend more time thinking about the content, just as I did when I answered this question. But you think about the content before you think of, you really need to start building the right audience, and you need to start building it early. You probably need to start building it before you make the jump. If you're not comfortable doing that, just make sure you have a plan to make sure that you have a plan to engage the right people. And we talked about ticking off the 99% when you only care about the 1%, but figure out who that 1% is so that you have a good audience of them, whether it's on social media or, networking, whatever it may be. Make sure that you're engaging the right people and have that good audience. I think the other one that I've missed, and I continue to miss here a little bit, is maybe having more of an active marketing plan. So I think a lot of people think about marketing, and it's easy when you're being an advisor in a virtual platform like XYPN members are. But it's easy to think that this computer screen in front of you is all there is to marketing. You got to get your tail out of the office, go do things that you enjoy doing, whether it's golfing, playing tennis, book clubs, whatever it may be. Get out in the community, do those things, because they may not be exactly in your niche, but you're going to thrive off of those situations and be prepared for the conversations as they come up. But I would say don't be afraid to be active, even though you're a virtual financial planner.
Yeah, that really comes down to the prospecting versus marketing, and that they're both very important, especially early on. You're absolutely right. You can't just sit around and wait for the phone to ring. You do have to be proactive, and you can be proactive in person. You can be proactive online. But it's not just about, write some blog posts, put them up, and the clients will flood your office. That is not, unfortunately, that is not the way that it works. It does take an extra layer of effort. So, well,
there's this aspect of butts and seats, right? You can have the best thing in the world to say to a client or a prospect, but if there's no one sitting across the table from you to hear it, it really doesn't matter. So same goes with your marketing. Just make sure you have the right audience out there and make sure you're building that as well as your content.
So if there's one piece of advice that you wish you could go back and give, maybe the Tony that was looking at launching a firm, one piece of advice that you have learned, one thing you wish you had known then that you know now, what do you think that one piece of advice would be?
That's a good question. I think patience is my problem. I mean, everyone wants to have that $250,000 practice on day one, and it's going to take some time. And I probably made mistakes along the way because I've pushed it too hard and pushed in the wrong places, thinking that was the right place to be. But be patient in what you're doing. Be very thoughtful in how you're doing the things you're doing. And anything you think is a good idea, give it a week, maybe 2 weeks. Keep thinking about it before you move forward. I'm not saying you shouldn't take action on good ideas and good opportunities, but just really be thoughtful in how you're moving forward.
Yeah, that is absolutely a lesson that I wish I had learned earlier on as well, and continue to struggle with, because it only applies when you don't have a good idea, right? And when you have the world's best idea, you have to move on it immediately.
Yep, and my marketing budget could probably be about half as big as it is now if I would have thought about things before I moved forward. So.
Well, Tony, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show and share so many awesome details about your practice and the way you're spending money and where the clients are coming from and your niche and all of that. So thank you for just coming on and being so transparent, and we really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Be sure to join our VIP community at xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to hang out with other XYPN radio listeners, ask questions for future mailbag episodes with myself and Kitsis, and to finally find a community of like-minded financial advisors. Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll see you next time.
You're not alone, and you're not crazy. It's scary starting, building, and growing your own financial planning firm. And that's why we put together a free private community just for you, the Cutting Edge Financial Planner. Go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP or text XYPN Radio to 33344 and join a network of thousands ready to change the lives of Gen X and Gen Y clients.